Welcome back to part 5. This is where we get into some logic of what does the computer need to print out on the screen as far as to tell who wins, right? So I'm going to change mine a little bit. So I'm going to choose just some different numbers that I'm just going to be working with to tell which number is greater. But obviously in yours, you're going to be doing rock, paper, scissors, and which one beats which one. Right? So, hopefully you kind of gathered from my last one of which type of logic we might need. I talked about looping. We've done mostly in our class while and if loops. We've talked about the difference, right? A while loop, we don't necessarily know how many times we need it to loop. An if loop, we kind of know the response, and in this case we know the response, right? If the player chooses rock and the computer chooses rock, it should print a tie statement. If the player chooses rock and the computer chooses paper, the computer should win. If the player chooses rock and the computer chooses scissors, then the player should win. So trying to match those situations up to what happens. And so since we know exactly what we want to have happen, it's not some undetermined amount of time or something that is totally up to user input, that we know those determined situations. So an if loop would be best for this. So we can start thinking down here, our if loop. And the structure of if, we can do just one statement, just have an if loop. If this happens, do this, right? Or if we have multiple statements, we might do this proper protocol is if, elif would be next, else if, and then you specify. So in the if statement, we need to specify what we're looking for. In the elif, we need to specify. You can also use else. Else is everything else that isn't specified and is the last thing at the end. You can only use else once, and you can only use if once. You can use elif as many times as you want. All of these statements end in colons. So I'm going to go ahead and put those colons. Yes, I know it's showing me errors. I am not done, so I've got plenty more to go. So we want to think about the first scenario. So if the player chooses something, we've got to figure out that scenario versus if the computer chooses. So I'm going to think about if cat, and then equals. Note equals is defining a variable or a list. So like we're defining what list is equal to. That's when we use it. But in this case, we're checking if that's typed on the screen. So we need two equal signs. And then I'm going to just choose some numbers, okay? So I'm just going to keep with numbers and just kind of show you the general pattern of how this works, and then you can adapt it to your rock, paper, scissors. So if cat is 1, and then we've got and, or, so in an and statement, both things have to be true. So if cat equals 1, and we'll say dog, or actually mine's not dog, we'll just change this. So my list right here, right? If cat is equal to 1, and I don't have that defined, I'll show you where I'm going to define it here in just a minute. If they're both equal to 1, then I go below and I tab once in to tell what I want this to do. So if that is a true statement, if both are 1, that this will print a tie, right? I want it to print on screen game tie or tied, whatever you want it to say. Okay, game tie, I'm just going to put in mine, for this case, both say 1. Right, both say 1. Now what is cat? Well, cat is referring to the player chooses, so I need to tell what I want to call this so it'll store that. So let's say cat equals the player choice. That way if cat is 1 and list is 1, then both say 1. Okay. Elif statement is something similar. So let's say if cat equals 2 and my list item is still 1. So I've got, okay, let me just check this because I've got something I think off, because note how it's not printing the same. So I'm just going to go back. So I've got elif cat equals 2. Oh, I've got just one equal sign. So this is actually creating kind of like a new variable, and I don't want that to happen. I want to check and see if the list item was 1 still. Okay, and elif is else if. If that's not true, then go down to this, check if that's true. And if that is true, then we go to both. Then we're going to print. And in this case, cat says 2 is what I want to print. So we can think about how this might be used in your game, right? Well, if the player chooses rock and the computer chooses rock, then we would print a tie. If there's something different, maybe computer picks rock, but you pick paper, it wants to say that the player wins. So we're going to have to think about enough statements to define every possible outcome. This can be helpful to write down on paper or to just generally outline it before going all the way through. What are all of your possible scenarios that you can have happen? And then come up with what should it print? What is the outcome of that situation? I am going to shorten my list just to be sure that this works so we can see some of our different. So I'll leave those first 3, but I'm going to delete out some of my old choices. This is what you should have, right? You should only have 3 choices and it's picking 0 to 2. Right? 0, 1, 2. It's going to pick one of those options. So, and then I don't have my else defined. That is going to create an issue if I don't define it now. Let's say for else that I say print not an option. And I'm just making things up, right? You want to make this specific to your game. And we'll get to that in just a minute. We can come back and define one here. But let's take a look at how this one runs, just so you can kind of get the general sense of what's going on. So if player chooses 1, computer chooses 1, and right now it's saying not an option. So we've got something going on because right now both of those are 1. And when I had that cat is 1 and list is 1, that this should print both say 1. So I've definitely got something going on in my code. Let's see if I can figure out what is the issue, what's going on. So first case scenario, cat, and that is whatever the player puts in, and it is all lowercase, so that shouldn't be an issue. My list here, and that is where my issue is coming in. Note that my list is options 1, 2, and 3, and I really actually want to call this option, and I don't have it stored anywhere. So we need to go back and fix that. So again, this is just kind of giving you kind of like a little taste of what's going on. So I'm going to pull out this part right here, and I'm actually going to put it up here and give it a name. That way I can call it. I am going to call this one list, and I'm going to change my other one to be dog. This way, my list is equal to that random one. Now it can truly compare it. Right now, it can't compare that. So let's try it again and see if this works. Oh, I've got a syntax error, and oh, because I left my plus sign in. So let's go ahead and get rid of that. We'll get rid of those spaces too while I'm at it. So if I choose 1, the computer chooses, oh, we don't have that choice in there anymore. Remember that I need to go add in that list item. So I'm going to put it outside my quotes. If I put it in, it's going to print it exactly as is. If I put it outside, I can leave it outside of quotes, and it's going to call this item and put it in there. So let's see what that does. So let's do 1. Computer chooses 3, and it's not an option, right? Because it's neither one of those scenarios. If I run it again, let's see what else happens. Player chooses 1, computer chooses 2, still not an option. Good, that's exactly what it should say. If I choose 1 again, let's see if we'll get the other option. 1, 2, still not an option. Player chooses 1. I'm just going to see if I can keep going. It's still just giving not an option. I want to see if I can get that third option to be sure that things are printing right. Right now I'm only getting not an option because of the way I have it set. 1 and 1 both say 1. That's what I was trying to get to because I wanted to check to see if this was true. Okay, so note how all of those are printing and kind of how we changed that up. And you might need to go do some changing in yours as well, but see if with that logic that you can maybe figure out what is next. Where do you go? Can you come up with all the different rock, paper, scissors options and type them up? And if not, let's keep going and let's change this just a little bit so that it matches more of what you are doing. So in this case, let's say the player input cat. let's say it's equal to rock, right? One of your choices. And then instead of 1, right, that we know that we needed to backspace and we needed to choose rock, paper, and scissors. So I'm going to choose R, B, S just for time's sake and making that easier. So let's say that both are rock. Well, in this case, what is the scenario when both choose rock? Hopefully you're saying that that's a tie game, so print out what you want it to say that that's a tie. Now, what if cat is still rock, but the computer in our list chooses the P option, which is paper? Who wins, paper or rock? Well, the paper wins, and who was it that chose paper in this scenario? That should be your computer, right? Computer wins. Then if we go down here in our else option, I'm going to say don't use your else option. Okay, so leave that one off. We're going to call this an elif statement, and we're going to keep going. List out every other scenario that can happen in an elif statement and try it out. See if it works and runs like my original version in part 1. If you forget what that looks like, go back and see if you can figure out what that should look like on the screen. Go back to part 1, watch it, and you'll get an example. And let's pop